Grace Mitchell stared at her phone screen, reading the message for the third time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. Grace, I can't do this anymore. Stephanie and I have been seeing each other for months. I'm sorry. It's over. The bathroom mirror at the Pearl restaurant reflected a woman Grace barely recognized. She'd spent 2 hours getting ready for tonight. The emerald green dress that hugged her curves perfectly. Her honey blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, makeup applied with precision. Valentine's Day was supposed to be special. 5 years with Trevor deserved celebration, or so she'd thought. Her hands trembled as she gripped the marble countertop. Stephanie, her own cousin, the one who'd cried on Grace's shoulder 6 months ago about her own breakup, the one Grace had invited to their Sunday brunches, their movie nights, their lives. Grace took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and made a decision. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't give Trevor, or Stephanie, or anyone else in this restaurant the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She'd paid a deposit for the best table in the house, and she was going to enjoy her meal even if it killed her. Walking back into the dining room felt like crossing a battlefield. The hostess, a young woman named Caroline, gave her a sympathetic look that Grace pretended not to notice. Other diners glanced her way, probably wondering where her date was. Grace lifted her chin higher and made her way to table 12. The Pearl was Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. All floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Crystal chandeliers and tables draped in cream-colored linens. Every table was occupied by couples holding hands, sharing desserts, lost in their own romantic worlds. Except hers. Grace sat down and immediately reached for the wine menu. A bottle of Chateau Margaux caught her eye. Outrageously expensive and absolutely perfect for drowning her sorrows in style. The lady has excellent taste, a deep voice said from somewhere behind. Her Grace turned slightly and found herself looking across the room at a man who made her forget momentarily why she was upset. He sat alone at table 7, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Dark hair with distinguished silver at the temples, strong jawline, and eyes that even from a distance seemed to see straight through her. He raised his own wine glass in a silent toast, a small smile playing at his lips. It wasn't a smile of pity. It was acknowledgement, solidarity even. Grace found herself smiling back before she could stop herself. She raised her empty glass in return, and something passed between them in that moment. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition that they were both warriors tonight, fighting their own private battles. The waiter arrived to take her order. Grace ordered the tasting menu, the full 7 courses, and that bottle of Chateau Margaux. If Trevor wanted to destroy their relationship via text message 30 minutes before their anniversary dinner, she was going to make damn sure she celebrated something tonight, even if it was just her own survival. The first course arrived. Butter-poached lobster with champagne beurre blanc. Grace forced herself to eat slowly, to savor each bite, to prove to herself and everyone watching that she was fine, absolutely fine. She wasn't fine, but she was getting there. Halfway through the second course, pan-seared scallops with truffle risotto, the waiter returned with another glass of wine. Compliments of the gentleman at table 7, he said quietly. He wanted you to know that anyone brave enough to turn tragedy into triumph deserves to be celebrated. Grace looked across the room again. The stranger was watching her with those intense eyes, and this time his smile was warmer, more genuine. She mouthed, "Thank you," and he nodded once, a gesture that felt intimate despite the distance between them. 3 courses later, with the wine warming her blood and softening the sharp edges of her anger, Grace made a decision that would change everything. She stood up, smoothed down her dress, and walked directly to table 7. Up close, he was even more striking. Older than her by maybe 10 years, with the kind of presence that suggested power and confidence. He stood as she approached, old-fashioned manners that seemed natural rather than forced. "Hello," Grace said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Thank you for the wine and the kind words." though I'm not sure if what I'm doing qualifies as turning tragedy into triumph. It might just be stubborn pride. His smile deepened, creating attractive lines around his eyes. Sometimes pride and courage are the same thing. I'm Julian. Julian Reed. He extended his hand and Grace took it, feeling an electric current run through her at the touch. Grace Mitchell. Interior designer, recently single, and apparently sharing Valentine's Day with another solo diner? Investment banker, intentionally alone tonight, and completely mesmerized by a woman in green who refuses to let circumstances defeat her. His voice was like aged whiskey, smooth and intoxicating. Would you consider joining me for the rest of your meal? It seems wasteful for two people to dine separately when we could share the evening. Grace should have said no. Should have thanked him politely, returned to her table, finished her meal with dignity, and gone home to properly fall apart in private. But there was something in Julian's eyes that made her want to be reckless for once in her carefully planned life. Why not? She said, settling into the chair he pulled out for her. The next 2 hours passed like minutes. Julian was different from anyone Grace had ever met. He didn't ask invasive questions about why she was alone or offer empty platitudes about there being plenty of fish in the sea. Instead, they talked about architecture, about the way Chicago's skyline had transformed over the decades, about books and travel and the strange beauty of finding yourself. Unexpectedly alone on a night meant for couples, he told her about a recent trip to Tokyo. Describing the Shinto shrines and tea ceremonies with genuine enthusiasm, she found herself talking about her latest project, a boutique hotel renovation in the West Loop. Watching his face light up with interest as she described her vision for blending modern minimalism with vintage industrial elements. You love what you do, Julian observed, swirling the wine in his glass. That's rare. Most people I meet are just going through the motions, counting down to retirement. Life's too short to spend it doing something that doesn't make your heart race, Grace replied, then paused. Though apparently it's also too short to waste on people who don't appreciate you. His loss, Julian said simply, and the way he looked at her made Grace believe it might actually be true. When the restaurant began to empty, well past midnight, Julian insisted on paying the bill despite Grace's protests. Consider it my thank you, he said. You reminded me tonight that interesting people still exist in the world. That's worth more than an expensive meal. They walked outside together into the cool February night. Chicago stretched out around them, all glittering lights and distant sirens and the hum of late-night traffic. Grace should have called a car, should have said goodnight, should have gone home. Instead, she turned to Julian and heard herself say, I don't usually do this. I've never done this, actually. But tonight feels different. You feel different. And I think I'd like to kiss you. Julian's eyes darkened with desire. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. I've been hoping you'd say that since the moment you walked over to my table. When their lips met, it was like touching a live wire. All the anger and hurt and confusion from Trevor's betrayal melted away, replaced by pure heat and need, and the intoxicating feeling of being truly seen by another person. Julian kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment, and Grace kissed him back like she was finally awake after years of sleepwalking through her own life. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian said, Come with me, just for tonight. No promises, no expectations. Just us. Grace looked into his eyes and saw her own desire reflected back at her. For once in her life, she didn't overthink it or make a pro and con list or consider all possible consequences. She simply said yes. Morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across silk sheets that cost more than Grace's monthly salary. She woke slowly, her body pleasantly sore, memories of the night before flooding back in vivid detail. Julian's hands on her skin, whispered words in the darkness. The feeling of being completely alive for the first time in years. She turned her head to find Julian already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. In the daylight, he was even more handsome, his dark hair tousled, his jaw shadowed with morning stubble. Good morning, he said softly. Sleep well? Grace stretched, suddenly aware of her nakedness beneath the sheets.
Better than I have in months, actually.
She glanced around the penthouse bedroom, taking in the modern artwork, the designer furniture, the view of Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. Nice place, thank you. Julian smiled. Can I make you breakfast? I make a mean omelet. I wish I could, but I have a big presentation this morning. New client, potentially huge project. Grace sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. Where are my clothes? Julian pointed to the chair where her green dress was draped carefully. Grace, about last night. I want you to know that I don't usually bring women home on the first meeting. You're special. Grace felt her heart squeeze. Last night was exactly what I needed. Let's keep it simple, okay? No complications, no expectations. Just a beautiful memory. Something flickered across Julian's face, gone too quickly for her to identify, of course. Simple. Reached for his wallet on the nightstand and pulled out a business card, but just in case you change your mind about complications. Grace took the card, reading it as she walked toward the bathroom. Julian Reed, CEO, Reed Capital Group. The address was on Wacker Drive, one of Chicago's most prestigious locations. CEO. Of course he was a CEO. 20 minutes later, Grace was dressed and heading for the door, trying not to think about how right it had felt waking up in Julian's bed. Thank you, she said at the threshold. For everything. For making a terrible night into something beautiful. Julian kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. The pleasure was entirely mine. Grace Mitchell. The offices of Mitchell and Associates Interior Design occupied the 10th floor of a renovated warehouse in the West Loop. Grace's business partner, Diana Torres, took one look at her and raised an eyebrow. You're glowing, Diana observed, handing Grace a much-needed coffee. And you're wearing the same dress from yesterday, Grace Mitchell. Did you have a one-night stand? Trevor dumped me by text last night, Grace said, accepting the coffee gratefully. For my cousin Stephanie? That absolute piece of garbage. Diana's expression shifted from teasing to fury in an instant. Grace, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Surprisingly, yes. Grace sipped her coffee, letting the warmth steady her. I spent the night with someone else. A stranger, actually. It was perfect and uncomplicated and exactly what I needed. Diana studied her for a long moment. Good. You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are. Trevor never appreciated what he had. Enough about my disaster of a love life. Tell me about this new client. You said they want a complete redesign of their corporate headquarters? It's massive, Grace. 30 floors, complete interior overhaul. They want sustainable materials, innovative spaces that promote creativity and collaboration. Integration with natural elements. It's everything we've been working toward. Diana's eyes sparkled with excitement. If we land this contract, we can expand, hire more staff, take on bigger projects. Who's the client? Reed Capital Group. Their CEO is apparently very hands-on, wants to be involved in every decision. Diana checked her watch. They'll be here in 15 minutes. Go freshen up. We need to nail this presentation. Grace felt the world tilt sideways. Reed Capital Group, as in Julian Reed. You know him. I just met him last night. Grace's voice came out strangled. Diana, he's the stranger I slept with. Diana's jaw dropped. You slept with our potential client. Grace, this is either the best coincidence ever or a complete disaster. I don't know, Grace whispered, her mind racing. I need to fix my makeup. Stall them if they arrive early. In the bathroom, Grace stared at her reflection. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged, and there was a faint mark on her neck that her collar didn't quite cover. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman, who'd spent the night doing things that had nothing to do with professional interior design. She worked quickly, fixing her appearance as best she could, changing into the spare blazer she kept in her office. By the time she returned to the conference room, her heart was hammering against her ribs. The receptionist's voice came through the intercom. Miss Torres, Mr. Reed and his team are here. Send them in, Diana replied, shooting Grace a look that clearly said, pull yourself together. The door opened, and Julian walked in, followed by two assistants carrying tablets and portfolios. He wore a navy suit today, impeccably tailored, his presence filling the room instantly. Their eyes met across the conference table, and Grace watched surprise, recognition, and something deeper flash across his face. "Good morning," Diana said cheerfully, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "I'm Diana Torres, and this is my partner, Grace Mitchell, who'll be leading your project." Julian's gaze never left Grace. "Ms. Mitchell and I have actually met before, though I didn't realize she was an interior designer." He extended his hand across the table. "It's a pleasure to see you again." Grace forced herself to shake his hand, ignoring the electricity that shot through her at his touch. "Mr. Reed, what a small world indeed." His smile was professional, but his eyes held memories of tangled sheets and whispered confessions. "Shall we begin?" The next 90 minutes were exquisite torture. Grace presented their vision for Reed, Capital Group's headquarters, with the passion and precision that had made her one of Chicago's most sought-after designers, but every word felt loaded with double meaning. When she talked about creating harmony between different elements, Julian's eyes darkened. When she mentioned the importance of strong foundations, his lips curved into the smallest smile. He asked challenging questions, pushed back on her suggestions, forced her to defend every choice. It was infuriating and exhilarating, and felt oddly like foreplay. "I'm impressed," Julian said when she finished. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. I'd like to move forward with Mitchell & Associates, but I have one condition." Diana leaned forward eagerly. "Of course. What do you need?" "Ms. Mitchell must be the lead designer. All meetings, all decisions, everything goes through her directly." Julian's gaze locked with Grace's. "This is non-negotiable." Grace felt her pulse spike. "Mr. Reed, I'm sure we have other talented designers who could handle this project. I don't want other designers. I want you, Ms. Mitchell. Your vision, your creativity, your attention to detail. That's what I'm paying for." Diana looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "Grace is our best. If she agrees to lead the project, we have a deal." All eyes turned to Grace. She should refuse. Should pass this to someone else. Should maintain a safe distance from the man who'd made her feel things in one night that Trevor hadn't managed in 5 years. But this was the project she'd dreamed of. The opportunity to prove herself, to create something extraordinary. She wouldn't let one night of passion, no matter how incredible, derail her career. "I accept," she said, lifting her chin. "But we'll need to establish clear professional boundaries. Weekly meetings, always documented. Strictly business." Julian's smile was pure danger. "Whatever you say, Miss Mitchell, I'm completely at your disposal." The following weeks fell into a rhythm that was both productive and maddening. Grace and Julian met every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock in Reed Capital's executive conference room. The space had panoramic views of Chicago, glass walls that made Grace feel exposed, and a tension that was thick enough to cut with a knife. Julian was demanding, brilliant, and infuriatingly attractive. He challenged her on everything, made her justify each design choice, pushed her to think bigger and bolder. Grace thrived under the pressure. After years with Trevor, who'd never really cared about her work beyond how it affected their schedule, having someone who genuinely engaged with her ideas was intoxicating. But the attraction between them was impossible to ignore. Sometimes Julian would lean over to examine a fabric sample, and she'd catch his scent. That mixture of expensive cologne and something uniquely him. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed documents, and the touch would linger half a second too long. Sometimes she'd look up to find him staring at her with an expression that made her remember exactly what his mouth tasted like. They never mentioned that night. They maintained perfect professionalism, and it was slowly driving Grace insane. On a rainy Thursday afternoon in late March, Grace was alone in the conference room, waiting for Julian to arrive. She was studying paint samples when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I miss you. I made a terrible mistake. Please, can we talk?" Trevor. Grace stared at the message, waiting for the familiar pain to hit. It didn't come. Instead, she felt nothing but mild annoyance that he'd somehow gotten her new number. "Bad news?" Julian's voice made her look up. He stood in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking at her with concern. "My Relax. He wants to talk. Grace set the phone face down. Apparently dumping me for my cousin via text wasn't the brilliant decision he thought it was. Julian closed the door behind him and leaned against it. And what do you want? I want him to leave me alone. Grace stood, suddenly restless. I want to stop being so angry about what he did. I want to stop thinking about how 4 months ago I thought I was going to marry him. Do you still love him? The question hung in the air between them. Grace met Julian's intense gaze and realized the answer with sudden, crystalline clarity. No, I don't think I ever really did. I loved the idea of him, the security, the plan we had. But he never saw me, not really. He wanted me to be smaller, quieter, less ambitious. He was intimidated by my success instead of celebrating it.
Ow.
Julian crossed the room slowly, deliberately. Then he was a fool. Julian? Grace's voice came out breathless. We agreed to keep this professional. I know what we agreed. He stopped inches away from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I've spent 6 weeks trying to honor that agreement, trying to focus on business and ignore the fact that I can't stop thinking about you. But I'm tired of pretending, Grace. I want you. Not just for one night. I want to see where this goes. Grace's heart raced. This is complicated. You're my client. If we pursue this and it doesn't work out, it could destroy my professional reputation. Then we'll make sure it works out. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I haven't felt this way about anyone in years. Maybe ever. Tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll walk away right now. We'll keep everything strictly professional. Grace knew she should lie. Should protect herself and her career and maintain those careful boundaries. But she was tired of being careful. Tired of playing it safe. Tired of denying what she wanted. I feel it, she whispered. I've felt it since that first night. Julian's kiss was both familiar and brand new, desperate and tender. Full of 6 weeks of restrained desire finally unleashed, Grace melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt. Every nerve ending alive and singing when they finally broke apart. Both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. Have dinner with me tonight. A real date this time. Let me take you somewhere beautiful and prove to you that I'm worth the risk. Grace smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Yes, but Julian, if we do this, we do it right. No hiding, no games. I want honesty. Agreed. He kissed her once more, soft and sweet. I should warn you, though. I'm not good at casual. When I commit to something, I'm all in, Grace said, because neither am I. That evening, Trevor showed up at Grace's apartment, unannounced. She opened the door to find him holding flowers, his expression a calculated mixture of remorse and hope. Grace, please. Just hear me out. She crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. You have 5 minutes. Trevor launched into a rehearsed speech about mistakes and second chances, about how Stephanie had been a moment of weakness, about how Grace was the one he truly loved. He looked tired, disheveled, nothing like the confident man she'd dated for 5 years. I miss you, he finished. I miss us. Don't you miss what we had? Grace studied him, this man she'd once planned a future with, and felt absolutely nothing. No, Trevor, I don't. And you want to know why? Because I finally figured something out. I spent 5 years making myself smaller to fit into your life. I turned down promotions because you didn't want me traveling. I stopped talking about my successes because they made you feel inadequate. I became a supporting character in my own life. That's not fair. I always supported your career. You tolerated it. There's a difference. Grace's voice was firm, but not angry. I met someone who actually sees me, Trevor, who challenges me to be better instead of asking me to be less. And even if nothing comes of it, even if I end up alone, I'd rather have that than go back to being your diminished version of myself. Trevor's face hardened. This is about that night, isn't it? Diana mentioned you were seeing someone. You replaced me that fast? I didn't replace you. I found myself again. Grace stepped back, her hand on the door. I hope you and Stephanie are happy together. I really do. But please don't contact me again. Move on. I have. She closed the door on his protests and leaned against it, feeling the final weight of that relationship lift from her shoulders. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Picking you up in an hour. We're something comfortable. We're going on an adventure." Grace smiled and went to get ready, her heart full of possibility. Julian took her to a rooftop garden in the heart of downtown Chicago that she'd never known existed. They ate Thai food from containers, drank wine from paper cups, and talked until the stars came out. He told her about his ex-wife, a woman who'd loved his money, but not him, who'd left him for someone wealthier 5 years ago. "It made me cynical," Julian admitted, his hand finding Grace's in the darkness. "I threw myself into work, built my company into something massive, and convinced myself that was enough. Then I saw you across that restaurant, refusing to let heartbreak defeat you, and something in me woke up. I was terrified that night," Grace confessed. "Terrified that I'd wasted 5 years on the wrong person. Terrified that maybe I wasn't capable of inspiring real passion in anyone. You inspire passion in me." Julian turned to face her fully. "Every day, watching you present your ideas, defend your vision, create something beautiful from nothing. You're extraordinary, Grace. I hope you know that." Over the next 3 months, they fell into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. Grace spent weekdays transforming Reed Capital's headquarters into something spectacular, incorporating living walls, sustainable materials, and spaces designed to inspire creativity. Evenings she spent with Julian, exploring Chicago's hidden gems, cooking dinner together in his penthouse, learning the shape of his dreams and fears. They kept their relationship quiet at first, navigating the complexities of mixing business with pleasure. But Grace found that working with someone she was falling in love with made her better at her job, not worse. Julian pushed her creatively, believed in her instincts, celebrated her victories as if they were his own. Diana figured it out after 2 weeks. "You're sleeping with the client," she said over morning coffee, not quite managing to sound disapproving. "I'm dating the client," Grace corrected. "There's a difference." "Is it serious?" Grace thought about Julian's laugh, the way he kissed her forehead when she was stressed, how he listened when she talked about her work like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. "Yeah, it might be." "Good. You deserve someone who makes you light up like that." Diana grinned. "Just try not to let it compromise the project. We're doing amazing work." In late May, Julian surprised her with plane tickets. "We're going to Paris," he announced over dinner. "I have meetings there next week and I want you to come with me. Business and pleasure." Grace had never been to Europe. She and Trevor had talked about it, but somehow the trips never materialized. Now she found herself walking along the Seine with Julian, eating croissants in tiny cafes, sketching architectural details in the Marais district. On their third night, Julian took her to a private rooftop overlooking the Eiffel Tower. The city spread out below them, all glittering lights and romantic promise. A table was set with champagne and strawberries, candles flickering in the warm evening air. "This is incredible," Grace breathed, turning to him with shining eyes. "How did you arrange this?" "I have my ways." Julian took her hands, suddenly serious. "Grace, I need to tell you something. These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be better. When I'm with you, I'm not just a CEO or a billionaire or any of the labels people put on me. I'm just Julian, and that's enough." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "You've changed my life too. You helped me remember who I was before I started shrinking myself for someone else. With you, I'm brave and bold and completely myself." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's breath caught. "I know it's fast," he said, dropping to one knee. "I know we've only known each other a few months, but I'm 40 years old, Grace, and I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I don't want to waste time being cautious when I could be spending it loving you." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "Grace Mitchell, will you marry me?" Grace didn't hesitate. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Julian slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the Eiffel Tower began its hourly light show, sparkling like 1,000 stars had fallen to earth. It was perfect. Magical. Exactly right. They were married 6 months later in an intimate ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Diana was Grace's maid of honor. Julian's business partner stood as his best man. Grace wore a simple ivory dress and carried wildflowers. And when she walked down the aisle toward Julian, his eyes filled with tears. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered when she reached him. "I love you," she whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me." The reception was small but joyful, filled with people who truly cared about them. Even Grace's parents, who'd initially been skeptical about the whirlwind romance, couldn't help but be charmed by Julian's obvious devotion to their daughter. Trevor and Stephanie weren't invited. Obviously, Grace heard through mutual friends that they'd broken up after 3 months. She felt nothing but distant sympathy. That life felt like it belonged to a different person. 1 year later, Grace stood in the completed headquarters of Reed Capital Group. Looking up at the living wall she designed for the main atrium, plants cascaded down 3 stories, creating a breathing, growing work of art. Natural light flooded through skylights. Water features provided soothing background noise. And every space felt both innovative and welcoming. "It's perfect," Julian said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. His hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, where their daughter was growing, due in 3 months. "We did good work," Grace agreed, leaning back against him. "The best." He turned her to face him. "You know what I was thinking about today?" "What?" "That night at the Pearl, when you walked over to my table, so brave and beautiful and determined not to let heartbreak win. I knew right then that you were going to change my life." Grace smiled up at him. "I was thinking about it too. How one terrible moment led to everything good in my life now. The business is thriving. We're about to be parents, and I married my best friend." "Your billionaire best friend," Julian teased. "My best friend who happens to be a billionaire," Grace corrected. "There's a difference." "I love you, Grace Reed. I love you too." As they stood together in the building they'd created, surrounded by beauty and possibility, Grace thought about Valentine's Day a 1.5 years ago. The day that had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning. Sometimes you had to lose everything you thought you wanted to find what you actually needed. And what she needed was standing right there, holding her close, promising forever. Their daughter, Violet Grace Reed, was born on a sunny August morning. She had Julian's dark eyes and Grace's determination, evident even as a newborn by the way she gripped their fingers with surprising strength. Grace's designed firm expanded to 3 locations. Julian's company continued to grow. They bought a house in Lincoln Park with enough room for Violet and the 2 more children they eventually had. They traveled the world together, created beautiful spaces, built a life that honored both of their ambitions, and every Valentine's Day. They returned to the Pearl, sat at the same tables where they'd first seen each other, and toasted 2 terrible exes. Perfect timing. And the courage to say yes to the unexpected, because sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst heartbreaks. Sometimes you have to kiss a stranger to find your soulmate. And sometimes being abandoned on Valentine's Day is exactly the push you need to discover that you were never meant to be settled for in the first place. You were meant to be celebrated, cherished, and loved without limits. Grace found all of that and more in Julian Reed, the billionaire who saw her not as a woman to possess, but as a partner to stand beside. Together, they proved that fairy tales don't always start with "once upon a time." Sometimes they start with a text message, a green dress, and the decision to keep a reservation even when your heart is breaking. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly how happily ever after begins.